Step away from the vehicle right now. Don't make me repeat myself. There is no way a woman like you owns a car like this." The words cracked through the sweltering August air in the Lenox Square parking lot, slicing straight through the quiet hum of weekend shoppers like a whip. Before I take you deeper into what happened next, tell me, where are you watching from? Make sure to subscribe to the channel and tap the like button so more people can hear stories that need to be told. Judge Alicia Harper, 44 years old, respected in every legal circle from Atlanta to Washington, D.C., froze for a moment, not out of fear, but out of the familiar sting those words carried. She stood beside her father's prized 1970 Cadillac Eldorado, its deep maroon paint gleaming under the sun, the chrome trim catching streaks of light that felt almost out of place against the shadow now falling over her. She had just pulled in, stepping out with her leather briefcase, embossed with the gold seal of the United States District Court, tucked neatly under her arm. But to Officer Ethan Ramsey, a 14-year veteran with a badge number that had crossed too many complaint forms, the sight wasn't one of a professional woman enjoying her Saturday. It was, in his mind, a crime scene. And Jacob Pierce, the rookie at his side, carried an expression that could only be described as a smirk in search of a reason to escalate. Phones began to rise in the crowd. A young student named Zoe Thompson, standing by the crosswalk in her Morehouse hoodie, had already gone live on Instagram. Her feed jumped from 1,000 to 4,000 viewers in minutes, comments scrolling fast. "Racial profiling. Is this really happening in 2024? Stay strong. Sis." Alicia, her posture still straight, lifted her chin and met Ramsey's glare. "Officer, this vehicle belongs to me," she said, her voice calm yet deliberate. "I can explain if you'll allow me to speak." Ramsey's eyes flickered to the Cadillac, then back to her. "A $90,000 classic?" "Not likely," he said. "Just loud enough for the growing crowd to hear." Pierce stepped forward, his tone sharper. "Show us your ID now, or we'll have no choice but to put you in cuffs." The air shifted. Those nearby could feel the tension winding tighter, the kind that could snap into something ugly without warning. Alicia glanced briefly at her briefcase on the passenger seat. Inside, beyond her ID, were confidential case files, including details of a misconduct investigation that named Officer Ethan Ramsey himself. She knew that if she reached for it now, the moment would spiral. Clara Mitchell, 70 years old and moving with the determination of someone half her age, pushed through the crowd. She had worked decades as a court stenographer and had seen Alicia preside over cases with fairness and force. "That's Judge Harper," she called out, her voice cutting above the murmurs. But before the recognition could shift the tide, Pierce snapped, "Back away, ma'am, or you'll be arrested for obstruction." Zoe's phone screen showed the viewer count climbing past 6,000. Comments came faster. "Get his badge number. Call Channel 11 News." Alicia's phone, tucked in her pocket, buzzed with the name Chief Justice Eleanor Grant flashing on the screen. She was supposed to be on a secure video call within the next half hour. A vote that would decide whether a police reform bill passed with a narrow 5-4 margin. Every second she stood here, humiliated in front of strangers. That vote crept closer to slipping away. Ramsey moved closer, his shadow stretching across her blouse. "Place your hands on the hood," he ordered. The Eldorado's polished surface reflected her image back to her, composed, but with eyes that burned from a lifetime of moments just like this. Moments where she had to decide between defending herself and de-escalating for survival. She placed her hands on the hood, her gold watch glinting in the sunlight, and said nothing. The crowd swelled to over 30 people, their phones up like a wall of lenses, documenting every twitch, every word, every shift in tone. Javier Torres, the mall security guard, hovered at the edge, unsure whether to intervene. "Officers, "This is causing a scene," he said, his voice tentative. Pierce didn't even look at him. "Police matter. Step back." Zoe repositioned her phone for a better shot, narrating under her breath. "They've got a judge. Yes, a judge. Hands on the hood like she's a suspect. This is why we need reform." Alicia breathed in slowly, counting the seconds, calculating her next move. She could assert her rights now, cite the Fourth Amendment, demand a warrant. But she knew Ramsey was already looking for the smallest reason to call resisting. She could feel the weight of Pierce's stare, his eagerness to notch an arrest on his belt. "Officer, I have no obligation to submit to an unlawful search," she said finally, her tone steady as stone. Ramsey leaned in just enough for only she and Pierce to hear. "Keep talking like that, and you'll find yourself in the back of my cruiser before you can say probable cause." The crowd gasped, as if they could sense the line that had just been crossed. Somewhere in that ring of onlookers. Someone whispered, "This is going viral." Alicia's phone buzzed again. Chief Justice Grant. This time with the word urgent flashing. The Cadillac. Once a symbol of her father's triumph over a segregated court system. Now felt like a stage for the same prejudice he had fought against decades ago. She remembered him polishing the hood on Sundays, telling her, "Dignity is the armor they can't strip from you, even if they try." And here she was, wearing that armor, even as two armed men tried to pierce it with suspicion. Zoe's viewer count passed 1,000. A woman in the crowd began chanting, "Let her go!" Others joined in, their voices a low rumble that could turn into a roar. But Ramsey kept his hand near his holster, and Pierce's smirk hadn't left his face. Alicia glanced once at Clara, who gave the smallest nod, a silent reminder that she was not alone, that every word, every second, was being recorded. Alicia knew the stakes were no longer just about her. This was about every black driver stopped for fitting a description. Every case file she had read where the facts told one story, but the treatment told another. She straightened her back, her palms still flat on the cool metal of the El Dorado. If this was going to be the opening act of a public reckoning, then she was ready to play her part. The August sun bore down. The phones kept recording, and Officer Ethan Ramsey had no idea that the career he was gripping so tightly in his fists was about to slip right through them. Ramsey began to circle the Cadillac like a predator testing the perimeter of its prey, his boots grinding against the hot asphalt with each deliberate step, his eyes scanning the car as if willing it to reveal some hidden crime. "This ride's worth more than you'll make in 10 years, he said loud enough for the crowd to hear, his voice dripping with the kind of disdain that wasn't about the car at all. Alicia kept her head high, her tone even, each word clipped with the control of someone who had been trained to remain unshaken in courtrooms far more hostile than this. "It was my father's," she replied, her voice firm but not raised. "Judge Samuel Harper. The registration is in my briefcase." Pierce laughed sharply, the sound brittle against the tension in the air. "Anyone can say that. You think we just take your word for it?" His eyes flicked to Zoe's phone, the live stream counter now ticking past 12,000 viewers. Comments flying in. "This is racial profiling. Plain and simple. Call her lawyer now. Someone tag the NAACP." Clara, still holding her ground despite Pierce's earlier threat, tried again. "I told you. She's a federal judge," she insisted. But Pierce spun toward her, his voice hard and unyielding. "One more word, and I will arrest you for interfering in an active investigation." Alicia's phone buzzed again, the third time in 5 minutes. Chief Justice Eleanor Grant. She knew why. The Federal Judicial Conference on Police Reform was minutes away from a pivotal vote. 5 in favor, 4 against, and her voice would be the deciding factor. She could feel the urgency pressing at her ribs. Yet she also knew that one wrong move here could mean more than missing a vote. It could mean handcuffs, headlines, and a weaponized narrative against her. Ramsey stepped closer. His presence meant to crowd her space. "Empty your pockets," he ordered. Alicia stared back at him, her breathing steady. "I'm invoking my Fourth Amendment rights," she said, her voice ringing clear enough for those in the back of the crowd to hear. "You have no warrant and no probable cause." Ramsey smirked, tilting his head toward Pierce. "Probable cause, suspected theft. We've got all the cause we need." His hand moved toward the driver's side door, but Alicia's gaze sharpened like a blade. "You'll need a warrant to open that vehicle," she said, the steel in her tone unmistakable. Mall security guard Javier Torres edged forward again, looking from Ramsey to Pierce, then to the gathering crowd that now numbered close to 80. "Officers, this is disrupting shoppers. Management is concerned," he said, but his voice trembled under the weight of their authority. Pierce waved him off like an annoying fly. "Go back to your post. This is police business." Zoe shifted her phone, the battery icon now at 35%, but her grip didn't falter. She spoke into her mic, voice low but urgent. "We've got nearly 15,000 people watching this live. They've been told who she is, and they're still treating her like a suspect, in the background." Murmurs turned into pockets of outrage, whispers of shame and unbelievable passing between strangers. Alicia took in the scene, calculating not just her own moves, but the temperature of the crowd. She knew how quickly a moment like this could spiral, especially with Pierce's fingers twitching near his cuffs and Ramsey's ego swelling under the scrutiny. She also knew that tucked inside her briefcase were sealed case documents naming Ramsey in an ongoing misconduct lawsuit. Davis v. Atlanta PD, a case she was overseeing, if she retrieved her ID. She risked exposing those files in public view, jeopardizing the integrity of the case. If she didn't, she risked the humiliation of being detained in front of the world. The decision was a tightrope over a pit of consequences. Ramsey took another step toward the driver's door, and Alicia shifted her weight subtly, placing herself between him and the car. "Officer Ramsey," she said, her voice calm but layered with warning. "You are dangerously close to exceeding your authority." Pierce scoffed. "She's stalling. Let's just cuff her and sort it out at the station." His words triggered a fresh ripple through the crowd, several voices rising now in protest. "You can't do that! She's done nothing wrong!" The viewer count on Zoe's stream spiked to 18,000. One comment read, "This is going to be on the news tonight." Alicia's phone buzzed yet again, Eleanor Grant's persistence a reminder of the clock she was racing. She weighed her options and decided, no sudden moves. Keep the crowd engaged. Let the cameras roll. The more public this got, the less likely they were to risk an outright false arrest. Pierce's smirk had shifted to something more brittle, like he wanted to prove himself, not just to Ramsey, but to the whole crowd watching. Ramsey's eyes darted between Alicia and the Cadillac, his jaw tightening under the scrutiny. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," he said finally. But Alicia only replied, "Exercising my rights does not make me difficult. Officer, it makes me an American." That line drew a murmur of approval from the crowd, and even Zoe whispered into her phone, "That's going viral." The asphalt radiated heat upward, but Alicia stood unmoved, her blouse clinging slightly at the shoulders, her briefcase still untouched on the seat. She was acutely aware that 10 minutes had already passed since the confrontation began, and that 10 minutes from now, the vote on reform could be over without her. But for the moment, she was locked in this battle of wills, every second stretched taut by the weight of power, pride, and principle. Pierce glanced at Ramsey, as if seeking permission to escalate. Ramsey hesitated, not out of mercy, but out of the knowledge that every second they stayed here. More eyes were watching, more phones recording, more reputations teetering on the edge. Alicia, sensing the shift, held her ground even firmer. She knew the stakes now went far beyond her vote or her reputation. They were setting the stage for what the next chapter of this city's conversation on justice would look like. And she was not about to hand that stage over without a fight. Sirens cut through the heavy summer air as 2 additional patrol cars rolled into the Lenox Square parking lot, lights flashing red and blue across the chrome of Alicia's Cadillac. The crowd parted slightly, the murmurs lowering to an anticipatory hum. From the lead car stepped Sergeant Maria Gonzalez, her calm but authoritative presence an immediate contrast to Ramsey and Pierce's tense, coiled postures. 18 years on the force had taught her to read a scene in seconds. And something in the rigid set of Alicia's shoulders. The phones held high around them, and the sharp tone in Ramsey's voice told her this was more than a simple vehicle dispute. "What's the situation here?" Gonzalez asked, her tone neutral but edged with curiosity. Ramsey wasted no time stepping forward, squaring his stance like a man trying to seize the narrative before it could slip away. "Suspected vehicle theft," he said briskly. "She claims the car belonged to her father, but she refuses to produce proof of ownership." Gonzalez's gaze moved from Ramsey to Alicia, noting the calm, unflinching way the woman met her eyes. Zoe's live stream surged past 25,000 viewers as hashtags like Justice for Alicia and Police Reform began trending, pushed along by shares and retweets from local activists and journalists. The tension in the parking lot had now spilled onto screens far beyond Atlanta. Channel 11 reporter Sophie Bennett, having spotted Zoe's feed, arrived on scene with her camera crew, the bright red microphone in hand, ready to capture what she already sensed was a story that would dominate the evening news. Clara seized the opportunity, her voice firm despite the heat and the stares. "That is Judge Alicia Harper, a federal judge. She's being harassed," she said. But Pierce turned toward her, taking a step as if to shut her down again. Gonzalez's voice, steady and commanding, cut him off, let her speak. It was the first break in the chain of intimidation, and Alicia recognized it instantly. Her phone buzzed again, Chief Justice Eleanor Grant's name flashing for the 4th time, the urgency almost radiating from the screen. The conference was minutes from a crucial vote, one that could alter the course of police accountability legislation across the country. Missing it would be more than a personal failure. It would be a blow to the reform she had fought to advance. "Officers, I need to make a call to resolve this," Alicia said, her voice still calm but unmistakably commanding. "No calls until we're finished here," Ramsey snapped, the tightness in his voice betraying how much control he felt slipping away. Pierce's eyes narrowed as he stepped closer. "Hands behind your back," he ordered, reaching for his cuffs. The collective gasp from the crowd was immediate. Phones lifting higher, recording every twitch of muscle, every flicker of expression. Gonzalez stepped in between them, raising a hand. "Hold on. Let's see the registration first," she said, turning to Alicia. "Where is it?" Alicia nodded toward the Cadillac. "In my briefcase, but it also contains confidential court documents protected by attorney-client privilege." Ramsey's lip curled. "We can take a quick look." But Alicia's voice cut through him like a clean blade. "You will need a warrant. Officer Ramsey, I'm sure you know the 4th Amendment still applies in this parking lot." Sophie Bennett's camera zoomed in on Alicia, catching the slight rise in her chin, the way she spoke with measured precision, each word heavy with the weight of both law and lived experience. Behind her, the heat shimmered off the asphalt, the scent of engine oil mixing with faint hints of perfume and sweat in the August air. Zoe adjusted her phone angle, making sure both Alicia and the officers were in frame, whispering to her growing audience. "She's holding her ground like a pro. This is history right here." The crowd now stood in complete silence except for the occasional click of a phone camera or the murmur of someone relaying updates to a friend over the phone. Gonzalez's eyes narrowed slightly at Ramsey. "If she says it's confidential, then we respect that until we have legal grounds otherwise," she said, her voice leaving no room for argument. Ramsey's jaw tightened. His authority publicly checked for the first time since this began. Pierce shifted uncomfortably, the swagger in his stance dimming. Though his eyes still carried a flicker of defiance, Alicia could feel her pulse quicken, not from fear, but from the calculated awareness that this was the tipping point. The moment could go either way: escalate into a full public arrest or pivot toward a grudging acknowledgement of her rights. She wasn't going to let the decision be made without her steering it. "Sergeant," she said, turning her attention fully to Gonzalez. "This is not just about a car. This is about an abuse of authority unfolding in real time. With 25,000 witnesses and counting, I suggest we resolve this before it becomes an even larger incident for your department." Gonzalez gave a small nod, the subtlest acknowledgement that she understood the stakes. Ramsey, however, wasn't ready to relinquish control. "We still have cause," he muttered. But the words lacked the force they had carried earlier. Zoe's viewer count ticked past 3,000, and the live chat became a torrent. "She's brilliant. He's cooked. Sergeant knows what's up." Sophie Bennett's cameraman shifted to capture the growing tension between the veteran sergeant and the two male officers, the kind of dynamic that often spoke volumes without a single raised voice. Alicia's phone buzzed again, this time a text from Chief Justice Grant. "We vote in 8 minutes. We need you." She could feel the clock pressing down, but she wasn't about to rush and give Ramsey the satisfaction of thinking she'd back down out of desperation. Instead, she let the silence stretch for a moment, letting the discomfort settle where it needed to. Then, "Carefully," she said. "The registration is in my briefcase. As I've said from the start, I will open it in your presence, Sergeant Gonzalez, and yours alone, so that the confidentiality of its contents is preserved. That is my offer." Gonzalez considered her for a beat, then nodded once. "That's reasonable." Ramsey opened his mouth to object, but Gonzalez didn't even look at him when she said, "Stand down," and just like that. A fracture in the authority that had boxed Alicia in began to widen. The moment wasn't victory yet, but it was a foothold, and Alicia intended to use it. Alicia's voice came out calm, precise, and resonant enough to slice through the thick August air. "Officer Ramsey, badge number 5173, I am Judge Alicia Harper of the United States Federal District Court. My identification is in my briefcase." The effect was instant. For a second, the entire parking lot seemed to still, like the moment before a summer storm breaks. Zoe's live stream counter jumped fast. 35,000, then 42,000, then 5,000, viewers flooding in as the revelation rippled outward. Sergeant Gonzalez gave a slow nod. "Retrieve it." "Slowly," she instructed, her tone steady but edged with the authority of someone who had seen this kind of scene turn bad in seconds. Alicia moved deliberately toward the Cadillac, opening the passenger door with care, aware of the dozens of phones tracking her every movement. She set her briefcase on the hood, its deep brown leather worn smooth with years of use, the gold federal seal in the center catching a flash of sunlight. With a quiet click, she flipped it open, revealing neatly arranged files, a fountain pen, and in a clear sleeve, her federal judicial ID, the laminated card, bearing her photograph and the signature of the Chief Justice, left no room for doubt. She held it up so Gonzalez, the crowd, and the cameras could see. Ramsey's face blanched, his jaw tightening but his eyes unable to hide the shock. Pierce's smirk fell away, replaced by something close to unease. The crowd reacted in a wave, murmurs, gasps, and the low thrum of outrage. Clara straightened, a look of quiet triumph crossing her face. Sophie Bennett, microphone in hand, stepped forward, her cameraman keeping a tight frame. "Judge Harper, can you comment on what just happened?" Alicia turned toward the crowd, her voice rising with measured force. "This is not a misunderstanding. This is racial profiling. You saw a black woman standing next to a valuable car and assumed theft. Her words struck hard, the truth in them undeniable. She reached back into the briefcase, producing a folded document. This is the registration for this vehicle, issued 3 years ago, transferring ownership from my father, Judge Samuel Harper, to me. This was his car, his pride, his legacy. She fixed her gaze on Ramsey. Your assumptions today violated my rights. Do you know the statistics? In Atlanta, your precinct stops black drivers 32% more often than white drivers, yet finds contraband 20% less often in those stops. That's not good policing. It's bias. And it's unlawful. Ramsey swallowed hard. I followed protocol, he muttered. But Alicia didn't blink. Protocol that violates 42 U.S.C. Section 1983, protocol that has cost this city over $1.5 million in civil rights settlements in just the past 5 years. How many of those cases were yours? Officer Ramsey, should we count them for the cameras? Zoe's viewers erupted in the chat. Messages streaming in. She's killing it. He's finished. Post his record. Pierce kept his eyes down now, his earlier bravado gone. Gonzalez remained still, her gaze steady. But there was a flicker of respect in the way she looked at Alicia. Clara stepped closer, a supportive hand resting lightly on Alicia's shoulder. Sophie's camera caught every detail, the set of Alicia's jaw, the way Ramsey shifted his weight like a man suddenly aware of the ground disappearing under him. Alicia slid her ID and registration back into the briefcase, closing it with a firm snap. The difference between law and abuse of power, she said slowly, is knowing when to step back. Today, you had the chance to ask, to listen, to respect. Instead, you chose to assume. A man in the crowd called out, "Tell it, Judge," and scattered applause followed, swelling enough to be heard over the hum of traffic in the distance. You wear a badge. Officer Ramsey, Alicia continued. And with that comes a duty greater than your ego or your assumptions. You are entrusted to serve and protect. You failed in that today. The words landed heavy, unarguable. Gonzalez stepped forward. Judge Harper, perhaps we can speak privately, she suggested, but Alicia shook her head. No. Sergeant, this began in public. It will end in public. The people here, and the thousands watching, deserve to hear it. The crowd responded with cheers and calls of agreement. Pierce shifted uncomfortably, his hands fidgeting, clearly wishing he were anywhere else. Alicia turned back toward the cameras. This is exactly why reform is not optional. This is why policies must change, why training must change, and why accountability must be real. Because today it's me, tomorrow. It could be someone without a title, without an audience, without a live stream. Zoe's phone caught the moment perfectly, the comments exploding with support. Sophie exchanged a quick glance with her cameraman. This was not just a news segment anymore. It was a story the entire city would be talking about. Alicia placed her briefcase back into the Cadillac, resting one hand on the door frame. Not to leave, but to stand her ground. Ramsey said nothing, but the look on his face told the truth. He knew his career had just taken a turn he couldn't control, and the whole country might soon know it too. Commissioner Daniel Mitchell arrived with the kind of quiet authority that didn't need flashing lights or raised voices to make its presence known. A 27-year veteran of law enforcement and the nephew of Clara Mitchell. He stepped out of his unmarked SUV in a crisp navy suit, his badge clipped discreetly at his belt. His eyes swept the scene in a single glance. The crowd pressed in close, phones still recording. Sergeant Gonzalez standing with measured calm, Ramsey pale and rigid, Pierce stiff but restless, and at the center of it all, Judge Alicia Harper, unshaken, her briefcase once again in her hand. Judge Harper, he began, his voice low but carrying. I want to apologize on behalf of the Atlanta Police Department for this violation. Alicia met his gaze steadily. Commissioner, apologies are words. What happened here today is part of a systemic failure, and I'm supposed to be casting a deciding vote on police reform at a federal conference that started 20 minutes ago. She reached into her briefcase, pulled out a slim silver digital recorder, and held it up so that both the commissioner and the cameras could see. Everything said and done here is documented. Georgia Code Section 161162. It's legal, it's admissible, and it's going to the right committees. Ramsey's knees visibly softened, the weight of the moment settling on him like a lead vest. His gaze darted from the commissioner to the crowd, as if searching for an escape that didn't exist. Pierce muttered under his breath, "We're done." But the mic on Zoe's phone picked it up, sending her live stream viewers, now over 9,000, into a frenzy of comments. "Yes, you are. Accountability time. Don't let them walk away." Alicia turned slightly, speaking not just to Mitchell, but to the nation watching through hundreds of live feeds. Black drivers in Atlanta are stopped at rates 32% higher than white drivers, yet are less likely to be found with contraband. This disparity has cost taxpayers $1.5 million in settlements. Officer Ramsey's record alone includes 20 excessive force complaints. And today, in broad daylight, with witnesses and cameras, he added another act of bias to that record. Pierce straightened slightly, seizing a moment to defend himself. "She was resisting," he said sharply. But Alicia's response was instant, cutting, and unshakable. "Resisting? I invoked my constitutional rights. Rights you swore to uphold. Invoking the Fourth Amendment is not resistance. Officer Pierce, it is citizenship." The crowd erupted with shouts of approval. Even some in the back began chanting justice for Alicia, a chant Zoe's viewers quickly mirrored in her comment stream. Commissioner Mitchell took a slow breath, glancing at Gonzalez, then at Ramsey. "Ethan," he said, the informality almost startling. "Do you understand how deep this goes? This isn't just about you in a car. This is about the credibility of this department, the trust of the public, and whether or not we survive the next week without calls for a full federal investigation." Ramsey looked down, jaw clenched, but his silence was as damning as any admission. Sophie Bennett, still holding her microphone steady, stepped in just enough to keep the camera frame tight. "Judge Harper, will you be pressing charges?" Alicia's eyes didn't leave Ramsey's face as she answered, "I will be pursuing every lawful avenue available. But today, I'm more interested in ensuring that what happened to me never happens again. To anyone." She shifted her focus back to Mitchell. "That starts with real accountability, not just for these officers, but for the systems that trained them to see my skin color before my credentials." Gonzalez spoke up then, her voice even but firm. "Judge Harper, you have my full cooperation in any review process. I've seen too many of these situations end badly. You handled yourself with more composure than most officers manage under stress." Alicia gave her a brief nod of acknowledgement before turning back to address the entire gathering. "This is why the vote happening right now matters. This is why reform can't wait. If officers can look at a black federal judge and still assume she's a criminal, imagine how they treat those without titles, without power, without a live stream to protect them." The crowd murmured in agreement, the hum of conversation mixing with the whir of camera equipment and the occasional ring of a phone. The heat pressed down, but no one moved to leave. The moment felt too significant to walk away from. Alicia raised the recorder again. "Everything said here is now evidence, and I intend to make sure it's not buried in a report or lost in some archive. This will be heard." Ramsey's shoulders slumped, the defiance bleeding out of him. Pierce, on the other hand, looked ready to argue again, but a sharp glance from the commissioner kept him silent. Mitchell spoke quietly, but his words carried. "Judge Harper, I can't change what happened in the last 30 minutes, but I can commit to ensuring what happens in the next 30 days will set a new standard. If you have demands, I'm listening. Alicia didn't hesitate. Mandatory body cameras for every officer in the city, with footage stored independently from the department, quarterly bias training led by civil rights attorneys, and a civilian oversight committee with full subpoena power, no exceptions, no delays. Mitchell's eyes narrowed in thought, but he didn't refuse. You'll have my written commitment before the day is out. Zoe's audience blew up again. Hashtag Justice for Alicia began trending nationally, with major news outlets picking up the stream. Clara stepped forward, putting herself beside Alicia, a symbolic alignment of two women who had served justice in different eras, both understanding the cost of standing firm. The commissioner gestured to Ramsey and Pierce. You're both relieved from duty pending review. Sergeant Gonzalez will escort you back to headquarters. Gonzalez stepped up immediately, her hand resting lightly near her holster, not in threat, but in a subtle reminder that authority now flowed in a different direction. Ramsey didn't look back at Alicia as he walked away, but his gait was heavy, each step the sound of a career unraveling. Pierce followed, eyes darting toward the cameras before dropping to the asphalt. Alicia watched them go, her face unreadable but her grip on the briefcase tightening ever so slightly. She knew the moment wasn't over. It was just changing form. The battle would move from the hot asphalt of Lenox Square to the cooler, more calculated chambers of policy and law. But for now, she had held her ground, and the world had seen it. Mitchell turned back to her one last time. Judge, I'll make sure you get to your conference, and I'll be there when the legislation passes. Alicia nodded once, stepping toward her Cadillac. As she reached for the door handle, the chant rose again from the crowd, louder this time. Justice for Alicia! Justice for Alicia! Zoe's phone captured every second, the viewer count cresting past 100,000. Somewhere across the city, televisions would soon replay the scene, and in homes far beyond Atlanta, people would talk about the day a judge stood her ground and made the system listen. Alicia stood in the open space between the Cadillac and the tightening ring of onlookers, her expression unreadable but her presence commanding, as she turned to face Ramsey with the kind of measured certainty that made courtrooms fall silent. Her voice, though calm, carried the weight of finality. Officer Ramsey, she began, I am giving you 3 options, and you will choose one right here, right now, in front of these witnesses, these cameras, and your commissioner. She lifted one hand slightly, palm open, as if laying the choices on a scale for all to see. Option 1, immediate suspension and a full federal investigation under 42 U.S.C., Section 1983, which could lead to criminal charges, loss of pension, and a permanent record in the National Misconduct Database. She paused just long enough for the words to settle in, the weight of them making Ramsey's jaw tighten. Option 2, accept a demotion, complete 300 hours of certified anti-bias training, and testify, under oath, before the Georgia State Legislature about the patterns and causes of racial profiling in your department. Your name will be public, your testimony will be public, and you will commit to serving as an example of accountability in action. Her tone sharpened for the last choice. Option 3, retire today, effective immediately. You will keep your pension, but you will never work in law enforcement again. You will leave without the stain of a criminal record, but with the understanding that your career is over. The parking lot went completely still. Even the hum of passing cars seemed distant, muffled by the gravity of what was being said. Phones recorded from every angle, and Zoe's live stream counter ticked past 12,000 viewers, the chat scrolling too fast to read. Pierce leaned slightly toward Ramsey, muttering just loud enough for a few nearby to catch. Don't cave, Ethan. They can't force this. Gonzalez's eyes snapped to him, a glare that carried the warning of someone who had no patience left for arrogance. Commissioner Mitchell stepped closer, his voice low but firm. Choose carefully. Ramsey, this moment will define not just the rest of your career, but the rest of your life. Ramsey's eyes darted from Alicia to the crowd, to the commissioner, then back again. Sweat beaded along his hairline, glistening in the heat. His hands, which had been at his sides in a show of forced composure, now twitched slightly. The cameras caught every micro-expression, every faltering breath. Alicia didn't move, didn't rush him. She let the silence stretch, letting the weight of the decision press in on him until the only escape was forward. Finally, Ramsey's voice broke the stillness, quieter than before, stripped of the earlier edge. "Option 2, he said, swallowing hard. "I'll take the demotion. I'll do the training. I'll testify." His words seemed to release a collective exhale from the crowd, though not everyone looked satisfied. Some shouted, "Too easy." Others nodded, acknowledging the power of forcing a public figure to confront his actions in front of the nation. Alicia's chin lifted slightly in acknowledgement, but her voice remained as steady as when she had begun. "Accountability begins now," she said. She reached into her briefcase and withdrew a single printed memorandum. Already prepared, already signed, detailing her demands for departmental reform. She handed it directly to Commissioner Mitchell. "This is a framework for change. Mandatory body cameras for every officer, funded at an annual cost of $3.5 million, quarterly anti-bias training, budgeted at $600,000 every quarter, and a civilian oversight board with full subpoena power and independent funding. This is not negotiable." Mitchell took the paper, reading the first lines before looking up at her with a measured nod. "I'll put this in motion immediately. You have my word." Zoe's camera zoomed in on the handoff, her viewers reacting in real time. She came prepared. "This is history. Memorize that list." Clara's expression softened into something between pride and relief, though her posture remained firm, a silent reminder that moments like this came from years of endurance. Gonzalez, still standing near Ramsey and Pierce, addressed Alicia directly. "Judge Harper, I will personally see to it that the training is completed and documented, and I'll make sure the Oversight Board gets the authority it needs." Alicia gave her a brief nod. "Good. Because reforms written on paper mean nothing without enforcement." The crowd began to buzz again, voices rising as the reality of what they had just witnessed sank in. This wasn't just an apology. This wasn't a press release or a promise to look into it. This was a public agreement, captured from every angle, that could not be quietly walked back once the cameras were gone. Sophie Bennett leaned toward her cameraman, whispering urgently, "We lead with this. It's not just a confrontation. It's a policy shift happening live." Ramsey stood stiff, as if trying to hold on to the fragments of authority still left to him. Alicia turned toward him one last time. "Officer Ramsey, you've made your choice. You will be held to it, and you will understand, by the end of your training and testimony, what it feels like to truly serve justice instead of undermining it." Ramsey didn't respond, his eyes fixed somewhere far past her, but his shoulders had dropped, the fight drained from his frame. Pierce shifted uncomfortably, perhaps realizing that his own actions had not gone unnoticed by the crowd or the cameras. Alicia stepped back toward her Cadillac, but she didn't get in just yet. She addressed the crowd instead, her voice strong enough to carry over the noise. "This is why we cannot wait for reform, because every day without it is another day someone is humiliated, silenced, or worse, without the chance to stand here and fight back. Today, I had the law, the cameras, and the witnesses on my side. Not everyone will, and that's why we fight for them." Her words drew applause, not the raucous kind of a rally, but the steady, deliberate clapping of people who understood they were standing in the middle of something that would ripple far beyond this parking lot. Gonzalez led Ramsey and Pierce toward the commissioner's SUV, their steps slow, their silence heavy. Mitchell remained with Alicia for a moment longer, glancing down at the memorandum in his hand as though already envisioning the battles ahead to make it real. Zoe, still streaming, panned her phone across the crowd, then back to Alicia. "For everyone watching," she said into the mic. "This is what accountability can look like when people refuse to back down." In the live stream comments, someone posted, "Bookmark this day. It's the day the tide turned." Alicia finally opened the driver's side door, resting one hand on the roof of the El Dorado, its maroon paint still gleaming under the relentless sun. The crowd began to disperse, but the energy lingered in the air, a mix of relief, resolve, and the quiet knowledge that change had just taken its first visible step forward. And as Alicia slid into the driver's seat, the commissioner gave her one last nod, a silent promise that this moment would not be forgotten or undone. 8 months later, the city of Atlanta looked and felt different, not simply because time had passed, but because what had happened in that Lenox Square parking lot had set in motion changes that could no longer be ignored. Officer Ethan Ramsey had completed his 300 hours of anti-bias training under the direct supervision of civil rights attorneys and community advocates. The man who once stood rigid with defiance now spoke in halting, uncomfortable sentences before the Georgia state legislature, recounting his actions toward Judge Alicia Harper and the systemic biases that shaped them. His testimony, broadcast live to more than 2 million viewers, helped push the Georgia Accountability Act into law. The bill required body cameras for every officer in the state, quarterly anti-bias training, and civilian oversight boards with full subpoena power. Within 6 months, the Atlanta Police Department saw an 18% drop in civilian complaints and saved over $3 million in reduced settlements. These were not abstract numbers. They were evidence that accountability, once enforced, worked. Alicia's own role reached far beyond that one day. She founded the Samuel Harper Justice Foundation in honor of her father, dedicated to mentoring young black attorneys and supporting community-led policing initiatives. The foundation's first annual conference drew judges, lawmakers, and activists from across the country, eager to learn how a single confrontation could spark measurable reform. Zoe Thompson, whose live stream had captured every second, received the National Student Journalism Award. Her footage was studied in journalism schools and cited in legal discussions about transparency. Clara Mitchell, who had once pushed through a crowd to defend Alicia, now chaired Atlanta's Civilian Oversight Board, running investigations with a transparency the city had never seen. Pierce's career stalled completely. Repeated citizen complaints and his failure to adapt to the department's new oversight protocols led to a permanent reassignment to desk duty. The swagger he once carried on patrol was gone. Lenox Square itself became a symbol of progress. Mall management funded a $700,000 civil rights awareness campaign and installed bias reporting stations throughout the property. The ripple effects stretched beyond Georgia. Within a year, 40 states had introduced similar laws, citing the Georgia Accountability Act as their model. Civilian oversight boards appeared in cities where the idea had once been dismissed outright, and body camera footage that was once locked away was now routinely released to the public under strict timelines. For Alicia, the maroon 1970 Cadillac Eldorado remained a living symbol. It had been a stage for humiliation and a platform for justice. At the foundation's first gala, she had it polished to perfection and parked it next to the stage under the ballroom lights, a reminder that history could be written anywhere, even in the heat of a parking lot confrontation. The words she had spoken that day became the foundation's motto, engraved on plaques and printed in programs. Bias plus assumption equals injustice, evidence plus accountability equals change. The phrase appeared on courtroom walls, in classrooms, and in the captions of thousands of social media posts. Zoe's original live stream had been viewed over 20 million times. Teachers used it in civics classes, and police academies showed it to recruits as a lesson in de-escalation and bias recognition. Even Ramsey, in a rare interview, admitted that watching himself on that footage had been a wake-up call. The Samuel Harper Justice Foundation expanded rapidly, offering scholarships for law students, funding wrongful conviction appeals, and hosting quarterly community forums where residents could speak directly to policymakers. Alicia insisted that police representatives attend, not to defend themselves, but to listen. At first, those meetings were tense, but over time, they became genuine dialogues. Gonzalez joined the foundation's advisory board, continuing to serve as a bridge between law enforcement and the community. She often told new recruits, "The badge is not a shield to hide behind. It's a promise you keep every day." The spot in the Lenox Square parking lot where it all began now bore a small bronze plaque. It read, "Bias plus assumption equals injustice. Evidence plus accountability equals change. In honor of Judge Alicia Harper and the citizens who stood with her on August 17, 2024. Visitors stopped to take photos, some leaving flowers or handwritten notes, by the end of that first year. Alicia stood on the steps of the federal courthouse, flanked by Zoe, Clara, Gonzalez, and a group of young attorneys from her mentorship program. Reporters gathered as she addressed the crowd. What happened last August was not the end of a story. It was the beginning of one. We didn't just demand change, we built it, and we will keep building, because justice is not a destination, it is a practice, that night. As Alicia drove home in the Cadillac, the city lights reflecting off its hood, she thought about her father's words, the ones he had repeated every Sunday as they polished the car together. Dignity is the armor they cannot strip from you, even if they try. She smiled, knowing she had worn that armor well, and that now, because of one afternoon in Atlanta, thousands more people were forging their own. If this story moved you, comment where you're watching from, subscribe, like, and share. Thank you for watching and for standing with justice.